After 15 years, Sam Raimi returns to the comic book movie genre, and this time he gets to cast some spells with Doctor Strange. So let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Let me know your excitement level for Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and once you've seen it, what did you think about the film? This is a spoiler-free review, but the internet is the internet, so if you don't want to hear anything, if you want to be extra cautious, I wouldn't even read any of the comments down below until after you've seen the movie, because someone is going to post something that you don't want to see. And let's get started talking about the good. And the first thing you have to talk about with this movie is Sam Raimi. Sam Raimi is one of the most important and influential directors when it comes to the comic book movie genre because of what he was able to do with his Spider-Man trilogy. He's of course most famous for that set of films that just had a mainstream broad appeal. But prior to that, he was already a very influential and important director in the horror genre because of the Evil Dead trilogy. And this movie is a mix of the MCU, mainstream Spider-Man Raimi, and Evil Dead Raimi. And I would say that this movie is more Evil Dead Raimi than it is Spider-Man Raimi.
Groovy.
Now, the first half of this movie has the fairly standard, familiar MCU tone, except with some creepy monsters that you've seen in the trailer thrown in. But when you move into the back half of this film, it is distinctly Raimi. He is allowed to lean into his horror roots and have his own visual style.
Groovy.
A lot of MCU films tend to have the same mainstream appeal, style, and vibe. This is a Raimi film, especially in that second half. It has his bag of horror tricks, his visual bag of tricks, the way that he likes to transition shots as well as sequences, the way that he likes to overlap visuals with kind of layering going on. This is a movie that only Raimi could have created. And along those same lines, this is the closest to an MCU horror film that we're ever going to get. When they first announced the film, Scott Derrickson, the original director who directed the first Doctor Strange film, said that this was going to be a horror film. And when he left the project over creative differences, I got a little bit nervous that they were gonna back off of that promise of making an MCU horror film. But I think this is as far as the MCU can go with horror. It has the nastiest kills, the creepiest monsters and creatures. There's the undead here, and this is the goriest MCU film. I was a little bit surprised that they were able to get away with as much as they get away with in this film and still get a PG-13 rating. When it starts off, it is very much an MCU film that you're familiar with. But around the halfway mark, it starts getting darker, nastier, more violent, and it is very much a Raimi horror film in the MCU. And for me, as someone that likes horror films and likes the MCU to try different things, I enjoyed all of that. Next, let's talk about Wanda the Scarlet Witch, and she is very much a co-lead in this film, and on a plot level, this is primarily a follow-up to WandaVision. And because of that, we really get to continue to explore the tragedy, the heartbreak that is Wanda's journey, and once again, Elizabeth Olsen demonstrates her full range as an actress where she can be charming and she can be tragic and she can be terrifying and she can be sympathetic and she can do all of that while feeling consistent within the same character. And I suspect that the direction that they take her character will be one of the more divisive aspects of this film once it comes out, but I dug what they did and where they took the character. And of course, as it is a Doctor Strange movie, you gotta talk about Doctor Strange, and I have been in the mood for more Doctor Strange ever since Infinity War came out, and I just loved how they used him in that film. And so my favorite episodes of What If were the ones that were about Doctor Strange, and we did get more Doctor Strange in No Way Home, but it's kind of a nerfed version of him to let Spider-Man take center stage. So here we get another Doctor Strange story. And while the plot is very much a follow-up to WandaVision, the character arc, you get a strong exploration of Strange and where he's at after the events of Infinity War and Endgame, especially in light of the fact that now he's a worldwide superhero celebrity, and the weight and toll that comes with that, and how it kind of ties into his ego. And this isn't spoilers, this is kind of the setup for the journey that he's on in the film. And they just find a way to really explore him as a character, what makes him tick, what's kind of going on the inside in light of where he was at the beginning of the first film and his relationship with Christine, and then everything that's taken place across these phases of the MCU, and then it uses the multiverse to kind of even add more and more layers into our exploration of Doctor Strange, his ego, what makes him tick, and how our Doctor Strange has changed and evolved throughout everything that's taken course. And I thought it was a very effective arc for his character where you really see some growth and learn some things about him and get a more vulnerable version of him without compromising his strength, his arrogance, and the things that make him so much fun and a douchebag, but a sufferable douchebag. And then our other main character in here is America Chavez, and I was a little bit nervous about the inclusion of this character because I just felt like, is it gonna get too busy? Why are we adding a new hero into the mix when we've already got Doctor Strange, Wanda, and all the other side characters that are taking place, the supposed cameos taking place? Do we really need to add another character to the mix? And once you see the film, it makes total sense why she was included. She's very much a plot device character, but a plot device character done right. She has a characterization, she has a personality, good chemistry with Doctor Strange. You enjoy her presence in the film, but her skill set is pivotal to the plot of the film, in which case it totally makes sense. It doesn't make things feel overstuffed because she's there. She needs to be there for all of this other stuff to take place. And the final thing you have to talk about with this film is the multiverse cameos and fun. To be clear, this is not a cameo movie. Whereas Spider-Man No Way Home was built around the idea of merging 3 different Spider-Man franchises together. That was at the core of what the movie was, so naturally it lent itself to a lot of meaningful appearances from familiar faces. And that's not what this movie's about. This movie is about Doctor Strange, Wanda, and America Chavez and their adventure through the multiverse. But with that said, as we are going through the multiverse, there are some opportunities to have some cameo fun. And so there's some sequences that I can't wait to watch opening night with a packed crowd to see their reaction when certain things happen with certain people and the way that it plays out. I certainly had a gigantic grin on my face, and I can't wait to experience that with more nerds that are gonna love some of these moments. And there were some things that absolutely surprised me that I did not know were coming, or faces I did not know that I would see in this film, and that was very cool. But it's not a cameo movie. It's not a non-stop string of those. There's a little bit of that you want, but you have to go in understanding that this is not a cameo movie. And I would say that is for the better. I did not want a cameo movie. I just wanted a little bit of fun with the multiverse, but I wanted the story to take and characters to take center stage, and that is the case. So I thought the cameos were done right. And finally, while the story itself is fairly straightforward, it's actually able to have some twists and turns that are surprising and unexpected. In particular, because it leans so much into some horror influences and going in a darker direction, it allows things to have a bit more of an edge to it and go places most MCU films don't go. And that was just kind of a nice, pleasant surprise to have so many twists and turns. And the way that they did the trailers, I think properly sells the vibe of the film, but they left out kind of key ingredients that tied it all together. So I wasn't able to at all piece together the plot of the film or how the images tied together based off the trailers, and I very much appreciated that. Closing out the positive, I'd say save for Spider-Man No Way Home, this is probably my favorite entry of Phase 4. And even with Spider-Man No Way Home, that movie's special as a Spider-Man film more so than as an MCU film. And there's so many things about this movie that I'm so happy we're getting in the MCU, and that Raimi was allowed to be Raimi, that they would actually put some horror elements in there and gave the movie a bit of an edge. As much as I loved a bunch of this film, there are quite a few problems, so let's move on to the mixed aspects of the film. And these aren't good or bad things, these are just things you need to know going into the movie. And I think the biggest thing that might work against this film for a lot of viewers is their own expectations. There's been like 9 months of speculation about all the possible cameos that could happen in light of it being a multiverse film and all these other characters being brought in. And so people have gone through every poster and look at every shard of glass. They've speculated about every past casting that Disney now has access to because of the Fox acquisition. They've looked at every past actor that almost played a big character, every A-lister that was almost in an MCU film or almost cast in a Marvel movie, and they've created this version of the film in their head where it's just nonstop cameos of A-listers as A-list comic book characters and speculation of the end of the movie. It's like the portal sequence in Endgame, except every portal has a new cameo from a different person. That is not what this movie is. It's not aiming to be that. The trailers haven't sold the film as that, so don't go into this movie expecting Cameo-palooza. There's a little bit of fun in that ballpark, but it is not designed to just the main hook of the film, the thing that's supposed to make it good, isn't the fact that you keep going, hey, look, it's that actor playing that character. Hey, I recognize that person. That is not the draw of this film or what's supposed to make it good. That's just a spice sprinkled on top in a few parts of the film. Second thing you gotta know with this one is, as I said before, this is probably the most violent and gory MCU film. Once you get past about the first 40-ish minutes, it starts doing some horror sequences where there's characters that die in pretty gnarly and nasty ways. There are like undead creatures that are straight out of a horror film, and it's not going to be for everybody. I love taking my kids to MCU films, and I let my daughter watch Poltergeist last year. I'm not gonna let my kids watch this movie just yet. And I don't even know if I'm gonna take my wife to go see it opening night. I know she will not like all the horror elements in this film. She's gonna love a few sequences in it. That's why I really wanna take her, but she's also not going to like how creepy, how brutal, how gory, how violent it gets. If you're a horror fan, you're gonna think this is tame. But people that aren't horror fans that are used to the MCU, there's a lot of stuff here that will be very harsh and abrasive for them. Final thing to talk about in the mixed section, there are 2 credit sequences. The first one is a mid-credit sequence that is a tease for what's next for Doctor Strange. The sequence in and of itself is fairly simple, but there's something in there that was totally unexpected for me. I didn't know about it. I hadn't heard any rumor speculation about it. So that was a very pleasant surprise. And then the post-credit scene is a follow-up to a joke earlier in the film. It's a fun little sequence, especially for Raimi fans. And let's move on to the bad. And the first thing that comes to mind here is that the movie feels like it was directed by 2 different directors. As I've alluded to all throughout this entire review, the first 40 minutes of this is pretty generic MCU tone and vibe. In fact, I was thinking to myself, I mean, this is enjoyable, but this doesn't feel like Raimi at all. And then about 40% of the way through the movie, going into the back half, it is so distinctly Raimi. And not Spider-Man Raimi, Evil Dead 2 Raimi. With creepy stuff, the way that he does horror, visualizes things, how much it kind of gets into the spooks, the scares, all of that stuff. It feels like a pretty dramatic change, like 2 different people were directing the film. And I don't know if that was the reshoots. I'm not sure exactly what that was, but there's a lot of unevenness in the tone, and it gets more consistent as it goes along, but it's pretty jarring when it starts to shift from usual MCU to, whoa, that was actually pretty violent. Next thing on here, while it has some visual Raimi-isms, it lacks the spellbinding visuals of the first Doctor Strange film. One of the things that made the first one so cool is that it has the coolest CGI of the entire MCU, with like these world-bending sequences and like kaleidoscope reality, broken mirror reality. It's visuals unlike anything we've ever seen at this level. It's a little bit like Inception, a little bit like Dark City meshed together, plus combined with Escher drawings turned into live action sequences, and all cranked up to 10. And this movie has a little bit of that, but mostly it's creatures, it's monsters, it's kind of spellcasting action. It's not the trippy kaleidoscope visuals. It's not the Escher drawings brought to life. And so I missed that. You get the Raimi-isms, but you don't get a bunch of the really cool stuff you got in the first film. And the final big thing here is that the story is fairly simplistic. The reason the runtime relative to most recent MCU films is fairly short is because the story is rather straightforward and it moves at a very brisk pace. I mean, it introduces its conflict right out of the gate, introduces Doctor Strange's kind of character arc in the second sequence, and then we're almost immediately thrown into the adventure, and it puts it all out there very early on and moves briskly through its adventure. And on the one hand, I do appreciate the fact that not every MCU film needs to be 2.5+ hours. Not everything has to be this big epic. I appreciate that it was a little bit more streamlined, but when you call your movie In the Multiverse of Madness, there's an expectation that there's going to be a good bit of madness and insanity, and this is more like multiverse fun, a little bit of it, a bit of a multiverse adventure. This is not multiverse madness. It could have got a lot crazier, wilder, and whereas I've said a lot of these recent comic book movies could be cut by 10-15 minutes, this is one where 10 more minutes to let things breathe a little bit, have a little bit more crazy, maybe even add one or two more cameos into it. I think there's even more fun they could have had here, and instead they kind of went for this kind of real brisk fly through the film pacing, and I think they could have gone deeper with the madness, with the crazy, with the multiverse insanity, and instead we got a pretty straightforward, simple version of this adventure. And while the stakes are very high, the plot itself isn't all that complex. And to tie some of that together, Sam Raimi was brought in to direct this film fairly late in the process, and then they shifted around some release orders with No Way Home, and then there were some big reshoots. And I feel like Sam Raimi did his best to bring his A game when directing the film, but he didn't necessarily have enough control when it came to constructing the overall story and flow for things. And so you kind of have this constant tug of war in the movie between what Sam Raimi's trying to do with it and what the MCU kind of demands takes place in the film. And you could just imagine a version of this that would be even better. I thoroughly enjoyed this film, but you can imagine a version of it that would have been even better if they'd been like, Raimi, go for it. Go for it. Get your screenwriter. You put this thing together and have fun with Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Real quick before I give you my final thoughts, be sure to join me down below in the comment section. Let me know your excitement level and expectations for the film, and if you've seen it, what did you think about it without any spoilers? On that note, if you go in the comment section, be careful. Someone's gonna post spoilers down in there. I can't stop them from doing it. You have been warned. Also, over the next few weeks, I got a bunch of Doctor Strange and MCU content coming your way. Friday, I'll have a spoiler review where I'll talk about all the specifics, all the cameos, all the twists, all the turns. Saturday, I'm gonna rank the MCU and DCU films together. I've got several other MCU rankings that I haven't updated in like 3-4 years, gonna be dropping in the next couple weeks, and I'm gonna rank all the Sam Raimi films. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to come back for more. Overall, it's not a home run for the MCU, but it is a solid double. They let Sam Raimi make an MCU horror film for the most part. You get a little bit of tension in there between the MCU-isms and the Raimi-isms, absolutely. Some of the writing I wish got a little bit deeper and more complex, but you get a Sam Raimi comic book horror film with a few great lead characters, some awesome action sequences, and some solid MCU moments. I had a great time with it. Overall, I'll give this one a B+. It's an 8.5 on the entertainment scale, and you should definitely check this one out in the theater. But don't expect Cameo Palooza, and if you're sensitive to horror films, you might want to learn a little bit more about what's in the film to see if it's right for you. This is not for kids. I'm not even sure if my wife's gonna go see it with me because she doesn't like horror films all that much. As someone that likes horror films, I thoroughly enjoyed what they did with this film. Be sure to come back this weekend and next week for more Doctor Strange and MCU content. And thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.